Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Quite a good number of people in the room, so we'll kick off straight away. Today's webinar, Securing Stakeholder Buy-In for HubSpot. I'm joined by a great group of people here today. I'm Paul, the Managing Director of Fuelius. I'm joined by Hannah-Rose Farrington, who's a Senior Enterprise Accountants Executive at HubSpot, and Martin, who is CEO and co-founder of Symbe. We'll jump straight into the webinar. I won't spend an awful amount of time on introductions, but today there's sort of three key things we hope to deliver from an objective perspective. I guess the first is answering the question as to why do we need a business case? You know, what is the business case designed to do? Why is it important in today's world? What the structure of that business case should be. So, you know, what's in it? How do we build a business case that is designed to get buy-in to software investment, and in this case, notably HubSpot investment? And then later on in the webinar, Hannah's going to go through some great real-world examples of business cases using a piece of software that, ironically, Martin is the co-founder and CEO of, and she's going to take us through some real-world examples of business cases and how that's helped her in her role. And I guess between us all, we'll talk about the part we all play in business cases and how we can drive them through the business. So I guess first things first, one of the things I would like to talk about is the fact there has been quite a change to the procurement landscape in recent years. And I won't read everything off the screen throughout this presentation, but a couple of key facts that we can talk about today. 84% of B2B buyers, they now report the sales cycles are taking twice as long as they have done before. Furthermore, 80% of purchases involve 4 or more decision makers. 38% of buying cycles end in no decision, and 43% of sales leaders are reporting much longer sales cycles this year specifically. So I think, you know, there's a number of reasons we believe this is happening, but there's perhaps 2 or 3 that we'll talk about now that are quite pivotal. The first we're going to talk about is the rising cost of money. So interest rates making money more expensive, and therefore making or bringing more caution to how money is deployed in businesses. The second, you know, it seems like a long time ago, but the second being the fallout that still remains from COVID, and the third being nothing new, but an inherent almost fear of failure from investment in IT projects. So, you know, there's a number of sources here. I won't go into detail too much, but IMF and McKinsey are 2 of the sources talking about how we have seen such a phenomenal increase in the rate of interest, and as such, as I mentioned earlier, an increase in how much it costs to deploy cash. I guess opening the floor a little bit to Hannah and Martin, how does this align to, you know, to you guys? I mean, Hannah, maybe you in your sales role. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about sort of what that experience has been in COVID, post-COVID.
Yeah, so certainly the rising interest rates in relation to, you know, money costing more for businesses to secure has definitely caused much more scrutiny on the ability to be able to make purchases. I would say that, you know, when I joined HubSpot 5 or 6 years ago, people were kind of able to make a decision based on a gut feeling and they felt really good about it. Whereas now there's so many more financial controllers, financial directors being included in that conversation. So what I've noticed is that we now have to have a lot more data to secure their interest and to ensure that they're taking decisions that you know, are not seen as high risk. We're dealing with characters that would be very much adverse to risk, and I think that's one of the things that has changed quite a bit in the marketplace.
Okay. And how that equates into the customer champion, your prospect, is that they need to be able to demonstrate with clarity why a purchasing decision needs to be made. And oftentimes they simply don't have that information, that business case, so to speak, to be able to go to their CFO or their economic buyer. And when they are requiring for even smaller spends, some model to show, that creates a real source of friction within a company, which is why a lot of deals really are lost just to indecision, because they just fall flat when there isn't a strong enough case to be made within the organization.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think if we go on to the next point and talk about the COVID-19 fallout again, a number of really strong sources here from Gartner, Forrester, PwC, and I think the last one, Hannah, aligns really well to the point you mentioned around CFOs are almost now prioritizing a reduction of operational costs, and as such, it's making it it's much tougher to justify spend, and as such, much more detailed business plans are now required. I think, again, opening the room up to you two as experts in the room, from a COVID-19 perspective, is there anything else to add here in regards to the journey you've seen from a sales perspective and how that's evolved?
Yeah, so from the COVID-19 perspective, I think so many businesses were firefighting. We were in a situation that none of us had lived through before, that we were, kind of just handed money and said, go do what you need to go to keep this company running and to keep these employees able to work. People suddenly weren't allowed, to go into the office. Their kids weren't allowed to go into school. So companies had to just unlock the funds, I suppose, to be able to get the tech that those companies needed. The fallout now is that those companies, in a lot of cases, have very disparate tech stack. They don't know why they purchased certain tech and functionalities. They needed it at the time, but they're not sure why they need to continue using it. And again, that's where that scrutiny over why are we buying a new CRM, why are we implementing something new, is really coming in because of the amount of tech that people have to get to keep their company running in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
And we work with a number of companies, and many of them share the same experience, which is during COVID-19, for that very reason that Hannah mentioned, they could sell just using a demo, right? They huge inbound traffic. They did a demo. Here's an order form, done. There was never such a need to actually build out and identify the value of solution as part of that discussion, because people were just out buying. They were shopping. They needed a solution. And a lot of people, actually, a lot of sales reps learned kind of their sales skills off of the demo. And the market has drastically changed. And now they're facing a model where actually the reality of a tighter economic market exists, where people aren't just buying on demos. They need to understand the value upfront of what they're actually going to be investing in. And that creates a really interesting imbalance. And it's why you see it, across the market, win rates decrease. And a lot of it has to do with that gap in skill set, but equally a gap in just supplying the right kind of business case to get a deal understood and over the line.
Sure.
Just to add on to that point as well, I think, how we sell has changed so much. As Martin said, it's reliant on product demos and so on. When you were in COVID, prior to COVID, we were all out on the road. We were out meeting people. We were face to face. You would gather so much information from people over a lunch about their business. When you're on that kind of product demo, it's very hard for people to feel that they can trust you. And I think that's when you can start to become that consultant and building the business case. That opens up the room for people to be able to actually think, oh, there is data I need to share with you, that as account executives, you would have probably got out of your stakeholders previously just from having a cup of coffee with them.
Yeah. I think it's definitely, I would say 3 out of 5 days of the working week I was on the road previously. I was meeting everyone from prospects through to current customers, through to potential partnership opportunities. And I think so much of the, can I look this person in the eye? Do I trust them? Do I think they have my best interests at heart? That hasn't changed. I still have my clients and prospects' best interests at heart, but from a remote capacity, I definitely think it's harder to demonstrate that. And as such, you're no longer able to sort of win on personality or win on rapport or win on sort of chemistry in those meetings. I think if anything, probably does build more of a requirement for that business case and for that proof.
Agreed. And the other point on demos is that demos will always be required, right? Because people want to see what they're going to buy. But a demo-led sale creates a scenario where you're actually putting the value in the hands of the imagination of your buyer. you're forcing them to connect the dots in terms of how can this actually solve my problems. Whereas if you flip it on its head and you identify the problems that they may have and help to understand how those problems can be solved and the size of those problems and the value of that problem, then you can use a demo to really demonstrate a much bigger solution, and therefore many times even have a larger account as a result of a value-based discussion.
Yeah. A question I've got for you, Hannah, that I was thinking about as you were talking about sort of people keeping the lights on and keeping employees in jobs during COVID. Do you think it's safe to say we're in a sort of era where we're almost in that renewal sort of period now where people are invested in 3-year software product in COVID? We're sort of the back end of that now or through that. Do you think we're in an era where, because it was a case of put some technology in our business, anything quickly, the projects have maybe failed, and now because of the previous failure of said project, there's much more scrutiny on the replacement or the rip out into a new system?
Yeah, so that's something that I've seen like throughout my career, not just in HubSpot, but even with companies where they've made changes in their customer experience journeys and they haven't really researched and planned it properly. So I would say certainly during COVID, there was plenty of people that were kind of just doing a quick plaster job on getting a CRM system in, but not really considering what that process should be, what systems needed to connect where. They really just wanted somewhere that their sales team could log their data, because they weren't going to be in the office able to have that quick catch up with each other of how did that meeting go? Did you go for coffee with that person that you'd have around the water cooler? Whereas, that's why the CRM, I suppose, needed to be brought in, and then it's failed. And, I suppose that's where it's becoming so important that you're collecting the right data. So if you're a buyer looking to implement a new CRM, you need to be working with account executives that are not just able to demonstrate the product to you, but are also looking at what's going on with the whole business. What are the core objectives you need to achieve? What are the figures that they're at the moment? And I think that's what will drive that success. But there is a huge fear of making the wrong mistakes again, I think.
For sure. And I think that leads us on really nicely to this slide, really, which is, this isn't anything new, but I think there is an inherent fear of failure when it comes to investment in IT projects, particularly enterprise IT projects, which I think, you could safely bucket the likes of CRM and ERP into these categories. And, my experience is board members of the types of companies we all work with have been around the block. They're experienced people. They've moved careers, they've climbed ladders, and they've been through software projects in the past. This isn't their first rodeo. And, some of the stats here are really telling. Gartner reporting that 55 to 75% of CRM and ERP projects fail. McKinsey stating that, up to 45% of those projects go over budget or fail altogether. And Accenture, this is quite a strong one here. 50% of enterprise software rollouts don't deliver ROI. And the reason behind that's because there's inadequate alignment with business objectives.
So I think, again, like when we look at, the Accenture piece and having the right number of stakeholders included in these decisions. So what you would have seen if we go back to the kind of COVID fallout is people were making decisions on their own. They were maybe, making decisions for marketing, making decisions for sales and so on. And everything, again, was quite separated. I think to ensure that you're going to make, the right plan and so on, you need to involve as many people in your business as possible with, the plan to implement a new CRM. What I would say that can be challenging in those circumstances that there can be too many chiefs, too many chefs. So we also need to ensure that there's, clear roles given to each of the people involved. And I suppose that's again where, working with your consultant, whether that's in Fuelius or in HubSpot, we can ensure then that everybody understands what their roles are for creating those objectives, and that, people are feeling like they're being heard, but also that we're able to help prioritize what are the core objectives and so on, because everyone's going to have different feelings of what they want and what's important for them for their part of the business.
Sure.
It's so important. And the more stakeholders, the more personas you need to convince or showcase the value and the solution for. I think John McMahon in his book, The Qualified Sales Leader, which I recommend to anybody in the sales universe, he talks about one of the final stages in the sales process called buyer risk, where the risk is the most at its highest that the deal won't come through, because it's the point where the buyer needs to actually sign. And that's when it's so critical to make sure that they have the full confidence that the decision to move forward with your solution is the right one. This is a career risk they may be taking. They're putting their name, their career on the line for a solution. And so he talks about having two critical things in place: having that business case secure and aligned with the buyer, and having a very clear implementation plan, something that we'll talk about. But those two are absolutely critical to ensure that you can get over that buyer risk point that comes right before the contract gets signed.
Sure. And I think that leads us on to a section you're going to deliver now, Martin, in regards to sort of, what should that business case look like? What is the anatomy of a business case?
It's really interesting because you say the term business case and everybody kind of has a different picture in their mind. It's not like saying the word newspaper and we all kind of have pretty much 99% the same picture in our mind. Business cases tended to be quite a nebulous concept. Some people think it's a spreadsheet, other people it's a narrative document. And that's very understandable because we haven't been trained, we haven't learned business casing in university, right? If you think about it at its core, a business case is a decision-making tool. It's actually used by your buyer to make a decision internally. We always say that the business case isn't ours, it's for our champion. We provide it to them and collaborate with them so that they can go internally and make that decision or get that decision for the buy-in internally. And the business case is predicated on three core things. It answers three very important questions. Why this? So why a CRM? Why us? Why HubSpot? And why now? And those three are absolutely critical because it depends on the prospect. But if that organization doesn't have a CRM or they've been doing things manually, you're understanding what are the pain points in not having a solution. If they do have a solution, or if you convince them that automation or a CRM is the way to go, then it's about why HubSpot. What is it that HubSpot brings that adds full value to an organization in a way that no other organization can? And then lastly, a very important part is why now? Why not in 3 months, 6 months? What is the cost of inaction? What is it about the pain points and the importance of the pain points that have been identified in the process that need to be solved today versus in 3 months, 6 months, or further?
Sure.
And the key components, really, there are four major ones, right? The first one is identifying the problem. And so from a value selling perspective, we want to understand through discovery, what are the challenges that this organization have? Is it that they've got just a blown up tech stack? They have way too many solutions and there's a considerable amount of value in consolidation, right? That's a key aspect. And then finding out what is it that they're spending on? How much is a total spend? Because obviously that can give us a really good view of how HubSpot can actually help them save on that consolidation. But there's a whole load of different types of possible challenges and problems that the organization can have. And the further one can get down into the details of those problems, the better one can be in establishing what the metrics are that can demonstrate value from HubSpot perspective. The second one is the solution overview. How does HubSpot address these challenges? And that can be, of course, through all the, when you get down to a demo can help demonstrate how HubSpot delivers this, and equally you can calculate the value of that solution, of addressing those challenges. All those combine into defining what are the core metrics that this business case is going to be built on. Is it around increasing revenue, reduce risk, consolidation value? There's a series of different outcomes that all combine to add up to the total ROI, and that ROI is obviously the return on the investment of choosing HubSpot, choosing also implementation in a way that helps to bring faster time to value. And Hannah will share some examples of what that looks like in a moment. And lastly, what I mentioned earlier, that implementation plan, because a business case is fundamental, but equally it's to demonstrate a real credible component of how you're going to actually roll that out, because the implementation plan demonstrates how that business case turns into value realization. The business case doesn't end at the sale. It actually is the foundation that the entire relationship between a buyer and a seller is based on, and therefore should be the benchmark on which performance is measured longer term.
Nice.
And then, we see that there's two worlds. There's the before business case and then the after business case. Before business cases are used, you have relatively undefined goals. ROI may be unclear. And like I said before, without a business case, you're leaving it to the imagination of your buyer to connect the dots around the value that your solution may bring to them. And not having control over that means that you're probably leaving a lot of value on the table for both sides. Because ultimately, the business case is meant to align both parties to bring the optimum value to both parties. After a business case, goals are absolutely clear. The benefits have been fully quantified, and both parties have agreed that this is a hypothesis that we both firmly stand on based on our pain points and your benchmark, as HubSpot in this case, can deliver. Everyone's aligned, and equally that urgency is understood. We should roll this out today, because for every month that we delay, we are wasting, losing, or not gaining X amount of revenue. And that answers that really critical final question: why now?
Sure. And I think my experience, working with you both, and for context to the audience, I've spent quite a bit of time with both Martin and Hannah on business case creation for a number of sort of deals that we've worked on together in recent times. And I think for me, my own interpretation of a business case has evolved. And I think that we see a lot of talk when it comes to, why somebody should invest in HubSpot, and they're taking top level, consolidate tech stack. They're taking very top level stats that don't necessarily align to the commercial goals and objectives of the potential buyer. Don't get me wrong, consolidation of tech stack and whatnot could absolutely form part of it, but they don't put pound values on it. They've not done the research to actually quantify the result of it. And I think what I've seen personally is the amount of discovery time I'm doing on deals has increased, but post discovery I'm so much more confident. I mean, if I was to have a property in my HubSpot instance that basically, and probably I should do this, but stated, has a business case happened, yes or no, I would likely envisage a scenario where we win more with a strong business case aligned to commercial objectives.
Deals that use business cases, from our perspective, from our experience and work, are 3 times likely to win versus deals that don't.
I think the point you made there, Paul, as well, that's really interesting is, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about that gut decision of, I know if I build more traffic, I'm going to get more leads through, but a lot of the marketers that we could be dealing with that are maybe, the kind of initial champion for changing CRM tends to be the marketing team. Then, they have to go to the sales team and so on to build that adoption. I think for a lot of them, they until they have somebody who can really go into the granular detail and ask them to get the right people involved who can give them the data for what's the average sales cycle, what's the average sales price, what's the average close time of an opportunity. Business cases prior to being able to use something like Symbe was really more like finger in the air stuff and more of a narrative than having actual data behind it as well.
Yeah, and you raise a good point. I think, we are competing, and we are up against other CRM vendors. We are up against other marketing automation platforms. And if we take the headline positioning statements, every marketing automation platform's getting you more leads. Every CRM's giving you a single view of the customer. How do we differentiate? It's actually in tangible, real, evidenced numbers. And something I see a lot in the HubSpot ecosystem. I go to Inbound every year, HubSpot's annual conference, and one of my favorite talks every year is the HubSpot keynote, which was originally done by Brian Darmesh. Now it's done by Yamini. And I think I see a rush at the evening of that night every single year where every HubSpot agency, they go and change their positioning statement to basically say the exact phrase Yamini delivered on stage, the end of disconnected tech systems. And that then becomes, right, the business case for HubSpot is no more disconnected tech systems. And that isn't a business case. It's a very strong message for a keynote, and actually drilling deeper into the organizational and the commercial objectives, for me, I think just completely changes your win rate and your success rate on deals.
And there's an inherent partnership between an account exec and a champion. And if you can collaborate together in a transparent way, that builds trust and establishes the value that can be generated by that organization by integrating HubSpot, then that relationship will go on way beyond even the deal, the period that the deal closes. And that is really fundamental to an enterprise, but even a mid-market sales process. Once that business case is built, then you have a foundation of a long-term relationship.
Sure. Okay. Let's jump into something Hannah's kindly prepared, which is a sort of live business case in situ. We're just going to pull Hannah's screen into the primary view now, and we'll pass it to Hannah.
Great. So we've been using Symbe in HubSpot to help with creating the business cases for anyone who's interested in purchasing HubSpot, exploring the possibility of implementing a CRM for them. We're now able to really take all of the data that you can provide us and then show you what the return on investment is going to be from that. So in this particular instance, you can see here we've got a few different templates. So whatever brand or mix of products you want to have, we're going to be able to build out the business case to support you when you go to the board of directors or the stakeholders. I suppose from where the data is that we would require, we typically say from a marketing hub perspective are looking for the volume of website visitors, the average contract value, and we can even add in additional variables, as I was saying, of say the average close rate, for example. So we put up that in here, and we can just pop it in a percentage. Let's say it's 50. And let's just say we want to say that we've got higher traffic here and so on as well. You can see then that based on the average contract value and so on, that these ROI figures are improving. So I suppose it's one thing for us to be able to, pull your data and, input this into Symbe. The next bit is where is this data coming from HubSpot? And you can see here that, if you are investing about £30,000 a year, you're going to see a return on investment of 750,000 within your first year. So this is absolutely huge number to see. And where all of this data is coming from is actually relevant to the industry that we're speaking with and also the segment of industry. So HubSpot has been collecting data on over 200,000 customers over the last number of years. And from there, we're then able to see, what is the likelihood of uplift if you're in the recruitment industry? What is the likelihood of uplift on website visits if you're in the manufacturing industry? And then all of this will help to support your business case. So of course, everybody wants marketing automation. Everybody wants a decent CRM that, the sales team is going to love. But how do you make that become a reality? And how, again, do you ensure that you're not going to end up being one of those statistics where, 60 or 70% of those implementations have failed? So this is where, with having, the, I suppose, case study being built by your account executive in HubSpot, we can then go to the team at Fuelius to actually make sure this is really credible. And then they can show the timeline of how this, of how this timeline is actually going to take place, what the different steps are, so that we can ensure that what we are assuming is possible for yourselves is going to be done within the right amount of time and so on. So the other piece, I suppose, around the business case is, we need to be able to write an executive summary. I'm sure there's plenty of champions and stakeholders out there that are thinking, okay, I've got it all in my head. I'm not sure how, to really word this. So again, we can collaborate with you on it. We can help you with building out the executive summary, taking all of the different outcomes that I'm going to show you now shortly, which will then go straight into here. You can also see then that across each of these different variables that we've added in, what the anticipated, say, increase of visitors is. So if you've got 15,000 visitors, it's going to potentially go up to 2,200 for the specific industry. If we're looking at a close rate, we can see where that close rate is going to increase. Now, bear in mind with this particular close rate, this is just on Marketing Hub. We can then also build in another side where we could potentially add in, what the outcome would be if we were to bring Sales Hub in here as well, and that 5.75 would increase greatly. And then you can see here that the other big challenge that the champions that I'm working with typically have is, we need to invest £30,000 into HubSpot. Are we going to break even? We're already spending, a lot of businesses I'm speaking with are maybe already using, a different vendor. They've got that cost running whilst they're implementing HubSpot. All of that can be built into the business case. And what I'm seeing with most businesses is that they're actually going to break even within the first quarter of implementation. And again, that's all down to ensuring that you're working with the right partner, that you've got somebody like Paul and Fuelius on board who's going to ensure that all of that roadmap is going to work really well. I have an example here of an anonymized business case, which is from a professional services company where they had a very interesting model. So they have a contact center that takes the initial appointment, and that initial appointment has a fee of £250 for when it goes through to the fund manager. When that fund manager then takes place, if they fully qualify that opportunity, they then go and create an opportunity in their case management system. And from there, then that basically there's no sight of what's happening with any of those opportunities afterwards. So when the business first came to me, we were really only looking at the very beginning of that journey. And I suppose that's where, when you start to involve more stakeholders and start to really sit down, like as part of your discovery, I think, like people tend to do discovery to be able to show you the product. And really, we need to be doing discovery to be able to build the business case for you. The product is just, this is just to prove that it's going to be easy to use and that you're going to be able to do it. So here you can see that initially what we were looking at was £250 per appointment with about 20,000 inquiries a year. But as we went through it, I then said, well, what happens with those inquiries if they are, one, what is the average contract value? And they went away anyway, and they spoke to a couple of the team on the fund management side. And the chief commercial officer then got involved because we were able to then show that we were going to be delivering a return on investment of 2.5 million a year. So if we actually just quickly remove this, you can see here that they were still going to do well, that if they just focused on the contact center, they were going to bring in an additional 225 grand a year. But when we looked at it across the whole business and what it meant for those fund managers to get better qualified opportunities through, the actual business was more likely to bring in 2.5 million a year, which was amazing. So with this, then you can see we were able to look at the total cost of ownership. And then again, we've got this break even within Q1. And that's then when we've worked with, the partner to ensure that all of this is, a credible business case, it's achievable, and that there's a full plan in line for them.
And I think you raised an interesting point there, Hannah, that, often we do discovery to discover what parts of a portal we should show people and where we can sort of align the prospecting view to their goals, or the AI reporting or custom objects or whatever. I still think that serves part of the requirements throughout the sales process. But I think, ultimately we can let the business case do the talking, and ultimately we can demonstrate part of HubSpot based on what's linked back to that ROI. So actually, if I'm putting myself in the buyer's shoes and I was being presented this business case, the first thing I want to see is how on earth do we bring the case handlers into this system? What functionality can you show me that turns that £250,000 ROI to a to the multi-million ROI that was there? So I think it's a really, really interesting point.
Yeah, and I think this tool really helps with the business being able to think beyond just their particular department, and also the account executive that you're working with as well. When you're going to the board of directors, you're going to your CFO, it's going to be a much more compelling business case when they can see that you've really thought it through from beginning to end of, I want to get, as a new CRM system in place to help the contact center team. Like, that's a no-brainer. There's no CRM system there. Obviously, they need one. Any CRM system that they put in is going to improve it. But are you working with a CRM company that is actually thinking about how it's going to be able to improve the entire process for the entire business? And I think there's actually a question in the chat there about what's the most valuable part of this, the process of building the business case or the business case itself. I would say that they're both valuable, but the process of building the business case ensures that you're going to have a really good long-term relationship with those core stakeholders. The value of the business case itself means that you've got control to some extent to when they go to that board of directors, because there's always that gap where they say, okay, I have to go build my business case. You've given them everything you can. You've done ROI calculators. You've sent over case studies, but you've actually helped build the presentation with them now. And then you're going to know what the dates are, when the next steps are, and that's then again where it's building that relationship. In addition to that, then they're also being provided benchmark data, which is something I think we're going to talk about in a minute. But this isn't just a plan for how do we get HubSpot into the business. It's also how do we ensure it's successful, and how do we prove its success as well.
It also helps to orient that entire organization around what are the core value drivers that they're looking for. So if you have a champion who is speaking with different internal stakeholders and you've shared this business case with them, it's collaborative. They can also share it internally within their organization. So they can internally work through this and all agree on what they feel is a credible, strong business case in partnership with you, with the account exec. And that's very important, because ultimately it's all around building that alignment, because that really leads to conviction on both parts that this is the right decision.
Sure. And interestingly, we did a poll earlier in the session, and just pulling up on the screen now, 64% of the audience have stated that the biggest challenge in securing stakeholder buy-in is that effective ROI demonstration. And I think, what we see on the screen in front of us now is, in my opinion, very effective demonstration of said ROI. So well done. Looks really good. Let's continue. Sorry, I think we're going back into the sorry, Danny, back into the, I don't think Hannah's finished yet, have we?
Yeah.
Oh, we have, sorry. Okay, so in regards to the business case, I think, Martin, you've made it clear throughout this process, and Hannah, say of you, that it's certainly a collaborative approach. It's certainly something that isn't a sort of send somebody a template and hope to hear back from them in 3 to 6 months, which, to be fair, I've seen that happen time and time again in the past. And I have seen, an incredible amount of discovery spent, an incredible amount of almost exploratory effort spent on prospects who say, great, I have what I need now. That will help me, create a business case. And you say, do you need any help with that? No, I'll be fine. And, it's almost it sort of feels a little bit like the sort of, can you send me some pricing and I'll get back to you? It almost feels a little bit like an objection. Yeah. It's very difficult to handle. And I think the point you raised is that this can be a really collaborative effort that, almost all parties are involved in. And, to this slide here, I think in regards to the role everybody plays, and the role we've certainly played recently, Hannah, on deals together, there's definitely a role for HubSpot, a role for Fuelius or the partner, and a role for the prospect themselves. Do you want to maybe touch upon the HubSpot involvement?
Yeah, so I think with the HubSpot piece, as you know, as I said, it's really about being able to build the theory of what's possible. And what's really important then is bringing in yourselves and Fuelius, who have the experience, who can then say, yes, okay, we can see what the objectives are, even qualify, well, actually, we've talked a lot about, I suppose, in this particular business case, increasing visitors. Sometimes a business actually needs to decrease their visitors and improve their quality. So that could be something where your implementation partner is going to take a look at the KPIs. They're also going to take a look at the kind of, I suppose, granular detail again of, you're getting like loads of traffic, but you're not getting good quality leads. What we actually need to do is maybe look at improving that quality. And that's where then the implementation partner can build that plan. But I suppose HubSpot's role is really to facilitate the opportunity to build a collaborative business case, to have your multiple stakeholders involved. And then I think the other thing that a lot of businesses find quite stressful is when they start to see the numbers on paper, and typically the software cost versus the implementation cost, there can be quite a big gap between those two. And so again, that's where by working with the partner, we can input even like your onboarding costs, your implementation fees, and so on into the total investment, so that when you see that Q1 break even, it's based on all of the costs involved. And I think it allows there to be a lot more transparency around the pricing conversation for all parties as well.
For sure. And if I think about, where we've played that role, or we've played our respective roles in deals together, I think the role when I work with HubSpot reps and we're using Symbe to be honest as our business case tool, I find that we are part of a deal team, as opposed to sort of what I have probably seen previously is sort of HubSpot running a deal process to a certain part of the journey, involving a partner, the partner being involved, and almost it feeling a little bit rushed from the partner side at the end, because the sales rep's taking it so far, they're forecasting that deal to sort of close, and now there's partner involvement, and the partner's left almost having to reconduct discovery, but in a way whereby we don't want to discover again because the prospect's been through that, although the partner hasn't. And I think the role we play when we start much earlier in the sales process with someone like Hannah is we're all part of that deal team, including the prospect, and we're all part of getting to a future state where HubSpot's been the chosen vendor, Fuelius are the chosen partner, and the prospect is confident in A, both of those choices, and B, that the business case we've all created is deliverable, is achievable. And, if I'm honest, if we fast forward 5 years, I would love to be in situations where we're looking back and we're seeing the prospect's been promoted and promoted and promoted, because ultimately they've achieved that business case and they've delivered a system. They're seeing the ROI. Hannah, the business case you showed earlier, if that particular marketing individual goes ahead and achieves that, I mean, they put themselves in for promotion for sure, because what an ROI.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really exciting parts of it is, gathering that data early on and, really being able to help everyone we're working with excel in their roles. And even like, for future opportunities for that person, for them to be able to say, I built this strategy, I, implemented this, with Fuelius, and this was the outcomes of it, and so on. I think it's really exciting.
And there's a common misconception when we often start working with new companies that a business case is something that happens at the very end. Okay, my champion's seen everything. Now they've asked me to help them build a business case to sell it internally. And that's kind of the worst time to do it, because you're scrambling to try to figure out some sort of a story that you think may resonate. Whereas if you think about a business case living throughout the entire sales process, even your very first meeting, because that, and you said it yourself, Hannah, think of it as a value hypothesis. HubSpot has a first meeting, a discovery meeting with a prospect. They say, look, we've done a bit of research on you. We think, based on HubSpot's core benchmark outcomes, this is the value we think we can bring you. But help me validate some of these assumptions. And the example that you gave of that anonymized business case, that actually happened as a result of that discussion where, actually it's our unit economics aren't X, they're Y. Our business model is very different. And by very simply restructuring the variables, you uncovered a huge amount of value that HubSpot could bring that organization as part of building that business case. And doing it in tandem with your prospect means that you're both literally building out the business case that once you're both comfortable, they can then take on and feel very confident putting in front of their economic buyer.
For sure. And then Martin, you spoke to me a lot about this framework for value. It'd be really good to hear you sort of take us through that and talk about how we're fundamentally building value in a business case and sort of the shared ownership and how that champion's vested in that success.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day because for me, it's really about that symbiosis, right? About it really is a shared process, and it doesn't mean that it's going to take a very long period of time. On the contrary, using a business case collaboratively can actually shorten your sales cycle because you get to the core issues. You can even get to qualification very early on, right? So if you're partnering with your prospect and you realize very early that maybe we're not the solution for you, it's very good to know that very early on, then go through entire process and unfortunately realize that at the very end. We've all been through that process. So that shared framework together, we found that prospects really, really engage well and embrace it. And equally, they're human beings as well, right? They're oftentimes the people that we're dealing with aren't the decision makers. So if we're collaborating with them and equipping them with the material that is critical for them to go and make the decision internally, they're going to look good in their organization. And like you said earlier, they will likely over time get promoted and they will be seen as a credible figure within their organization. So there's that relationship, that vested interest in optimizing value for both parties is what we consider really the symbiotic relationship there.
Yeah, and I think, again, to push it back to you, Martin, I think, I hear you speak a lot about how that business case evolves post-sale. If I take it back to the previous slide we had around the role each party plays in a business case, for me, I envisage a scenario whereby year 1, year 2, year 3, post-implementation, where HubSpot and Fuelius are very much still aligned to the buyer, and we are still driving towards the business case that we set out to achieve. We've had a successful year 1, we're into year 2, or we've completed year 2, we're into year 3. And our relationship is very much that of a strategic relationship where they feel they have an advisory panel around them. So, could you take us through how that business case can support that and how it sort of evolves once the sale is done?
Absolutely. Look, a business case is still a hypothesis until the rubber meets the road, right? Until actually you start delivering, it's still hypothetical. It's something that's foundational, it's built on real data, but until we roll out, that's still a hypothesis. And that's why it's so important that business case be considered the baseline of that relationship. We started on this date based on these assumptions of what we can deliver. You can use that business case to measure success moving forward, overlay real performance data, and use that as your quarterly business review, as your customer success tool, as a way to really understand how we're doing versus the original business case, reviewing on a much more frequent basis, and therefore understanding, do we need to course correct? Actually, are there greater opportunities focusing in this area? And so that means that actually the customer and vendor relationship doesn't end at the sale. On the contrary, that business case should be handed over to customer success to support in the delivery. We call it value realization, right? It's probably the most important part of the business case because that's really where the evidence of the solution comes out. And that also makes for a much smoother transition after year 1, year 2, year 3. It makes for a much more open conversation. There's no surprises about renewals, expansions, or any changes longer term to the contract and other opportunities.
Sure. Okay. Before we move into Q&A, we've got quite a few questions. Before we do, I think for me, there's a few key takeaways here really for us to drill into. I think, what I've learned over the last few months from working with you both is that, a business case is essential. And for me, I think not only does it drive the likelihood of deal completion, I think it I think it reduces the likelihood of, from a salesperson's perspective, it reduces the likelihood of almost sort of chipping or price negotiation. And, we're really demonstrating value. I think that's crucial. I think, as it says here, structure is key. And I think I've, prior to Symbe and prior to working with you both, been in scenarios where each time I create a business case, it's almost like, right, what should we put in this one? Where do I start? There's no structure that is sort of mapped out for success. I think collaboration is crucial. And, I've seen, it reminds me a little bit of sort of deal rooms, which we're seeing a lot more of now when we're seeing mutual action plans in sales processes. And one of the first times I spoke to you, Martin, I asked about the role this plays either inside a deal room or instead of a deal room. And we sort of spoke about the collaborative approach, which you've echoed here today. And again, the deals I've worked recently with Hannah and other people in Hannah's team and whatnot, we've really collaborated with the prospect. And I don't really feel like we're selling to them. I feel like we're all driving towards the same goal. And I think finally on that, it is a living document. It is something that evolves over the course of that sales process, and assumptions are made on day one that are then validated on day 5 and tweaked and enhanced. And Hannah, in the example you gave earlier, I imagine that the contact center element was probably the beginning, and at some point in that living documents journey, it was bolted in and subsequent stuff was added, which ultimately bolstered.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think, Martin, you say to me all the time, there's 2 things that you ultimately need to deliver. One is a clear, credible business case, and one's a clear, credible implementation plan. And I think us as a partner have probably been, and I don't just mean us, I think partners in the partner ecosystem generally have probably not done enough in recent years to demonstrate an implementation plan. And I've seen, typically implementations take 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and there's just a notional, we think X to X weeks. And with Martin's advice and working on sort of strategic deals with Hannah, we're now working in scenarios where our project management function in the business are architecting complete 6-month statements of works with dependencies and full Gantt charts and resource plans on both sides of the table. But we're then presenting it to potential buyers, and they're understanding the route to success. So before we move into Q&A, Hannah, Martin, anything else to add?
I just was thinking as well, just when we were talking about, the business case being a living document and it being there to support, that client ongoing. I think in addition to that, financial times changed. I mean, look at how much times have changed over the last, 5-7 years. And by, working with your account executive from a very early standpoint, as you said, you would have seen the business case as something maybe that you would have done later in the sales process versus trying to get it done as early as possible. It also ensures then that, when people are looking at why are you spending, 60K, 100K, whatever it is on CRM or on marketing automation, here you go, here's the results. And I suppose that's why having that living document, collaborating with your partner, continuing to collaborate with the customer success team in HubSpot, there's never going to be a question mark over you securing the budget for your renewal and so on as well. And also, if there's opportunities for you to be able to expand in your usage of HubSpot, we're going to have that living document to be able to support that as well.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. So, number of questions have come in over the course of this, so I'll bring them into the window. So Kim's asked a question. Every business case solves different challenges. How do you ensure that you get all the right metrics collected to build the business case? What's the average time to identify these points, and what's the average time for implementation?
Good.
Okay, no, you can go ahead.
No, please.
Okay. So I suppose with ensuring you get the right metrics, as you saw with the anonymized business case, that was really a working document. And when we first spoke, we just asked, okay, you've got how many leads coming into the contact center, how much is an appointment? And as we moved through the process, we developed that. I would say, this particular project, went through quite a lengthy discovery in total. I would say we were working together for about 4 to 6 weeks. And that's then when we, had the presentation and everything ready for the board of directors. I would say it was probably by week 4 that we really got into the idea of what's the, average opportunity value of, a file that gets opened. And they're actually also pulling data together now on trying to see what the conversion rate is on those opportunities that, get opened, and upsell and cross sell. So we're continuing to work on that piece. The average time to identify those data points, I suppose, again, it really depends on how many discovery calls you're having and how open your prospect is being with you. Like, it's really important that the vendors can build that trust with the prospects to be able to share that data. We can get NDA signed, whatever else, but some businesses still feel nervous about it. And I think it's really important to explain to them that this is something that's really going to support them in making the right decision. So I'd say, on average, what I have found is, in an average sales cycle where we're kind of going through discovery, we're bringing the business case in early, we should have all of this prepared within, kind of 3 to 4 weeks if we're saying that we're meeting with them on a weekly basis.
Yeah, go on, sorry, Martin.
Just to say further to that, and we've heard from a number of your colleagues also, Hannah, is that by using a business case as part of that discovery, you're removing, you're enabling, or you're empowering your champion to feel more comfortable sharing that information. Normally, it may feel a bit cagey. It's like, why do you want some potentially detailed or privileged information? But when they see why you're using it, that it's to build a business case, it makes the conversation much more fluid because they understand the reason. And that's why discovery is so important, with the premise of let's use a business case from the very beginning, because that's why we need this information.
Yeah, and I think the final point of that question around implementation, whilst it's not something, it really does depend on the organizational needs. But what I would say a business case has done for ourselves in terms of an implementation partner, it's allowed us to completely understand the order of magnitude of each part of the implementation from not from the standpoint of how much effort's involved for us, but how much does this drive value towards that business case. And I think as such, we're almost re-architecting the order in which we're delivering functions and staging releases over, smaller, more subsequent releases so that we can build time to value quicker. So whilst it might not, a business case doesn't necessarily change the overall implementation time, I think it massively builds quicker time to value, quicker usage of the product, and quicker adherence to and success of that business plan.
Imagine having your implementation plan and then showing the value of the increased time to market that your service could bring to organization.
Yeah.
If we can roll you out 3 months sooner, that's gonna equate to X hundreds of thousands of pounds per month in additional revenue this year. And that's what a business case can help uncover and really bring to the fore, because when it comes down to making a decision across a room of stakeholders who likely won't be speaking to any of us because they're in their own closed C-suite room, that's going to be the information that's going to matter to them, because ultimately their bottom line over the year is going to depend on how quickly they can roll this out. And so that's why that business case and implementation plan are so important to that decision.
For sure. Time for one more question. I think a lot of people may probably have 3 o'clock sort of meetings, but bringing this interview, Randall's asked, what's the most valuable part of this, the process of building the business case or the business case itself?
Yeah, so I would certainly say the process of building the business case, because that's where you're building that relationship. You're able to really get to understand what's important to that business, what's keeping key stakeholders up at night. Otherwise, you're running discovery without a business case. You're kind of running it again, focused on this is our product, this is what it can do. It's easy to use, and your team is going to be able to do great things with it and so on. But I think that part of building it, for me anyway, it's certainly been changing the conversations I'm having, and it's having a much stronger impact as well on getting people to follow up with me. If they're still in that kind of end of the decision-making process, they're going to the board, I'm still waiting to hear back on a couple of things. We've worked so much on this together that they're really bought into wanting to communicate with me and keep me updated on what's happening. So I think the building of it is really important, because it helps you understand, as I said, what's really important to each of those people that you're working with.
For sure. And I think, in RFP processes and whatnot as well, I think, whilst they can be sometimes a bit faceless and questions are submitted through a portal and you don't get to meet people, I think, I envisage putting myself into the shoes of the buyer or the people going through a scoring matrix in an RFP. And I don't know how unless the weighting metrics were so focused on costs, for example, but I don't know how you could not choose the vendor who has completely understood every single part of your business and put forward something that is almost designed for success. And I think, more and more we find ourselves in competitive processes where we're one of three or one of five or sometimes far greater. And I don't think the business place is as commonplace the business case is as commonplace as it should be. And I actually think that, if you're part of a 3-person competition and it's, I don't know, HubSpot, Salesforce, Dynamics, if HubSpot or HubSpot Plus partner have intrinsically understood all that information, why wouldn't you pick them? And from an internal process perspective, you're one of many staff members that are going to the CFO and asking budget for different strategic projects. If you're the staff member that's put forward an entire business case that demonstrates the ROI, again, why wouldn't you be the selected staff member who gets to deploy that budget and go and embark with your project? So I agree with Hannah. The understanding and the process of asking the questions, I think, is incredibly important.
It's a bit like learning each other's love language throughout the course of the process. Yeah. You're learning together what makes sense and what each side values, and how together you can build a relationship that's long-standing, right? And as a result, you also get to understand what different stakeholders within the organization value most, to make sure that it covers everybody's love language. Sorry for the cheesy reference, but it's kind of aligns.
No, for sure. Right, well, that's us. I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending. Thanks for the questions. Martin, Hannah, been great to have you. We will circulate this round to everybody afterwards. A lot of people have asked for the recordings, and there's a number of people that want that, so we'll get that round. But thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.